All right, so welcome to the Lawrence Hall of Science. I know some of you were enjoying the tour of the lab earlier this afternoon, so thank you for attending. Again, my name is Daniel Isofano. We're going to be conducting our September meeting of Community Advisory Group for the lab, and we'll do our traditional passing the mic and self-introductions. Name and organization, please.
Marcus Gandara, a community member.
Jessica Parker, UC Botanical Garden.
Jolene Ruffin, Berkeley Community Fund.
Jody Pincus, Rising Sun Energy Center.
Sarah Moore, City of Berkeley.
Eric Jung, City of Berkeley / Berkeley Community Fund.
Janet Tam, Nolan Tam Architects.
Ruben Lizardo, UC Berkeley Chancellor's Office.
Rena Dorff, the Lawrence Hall of Science.
Jen Tang, Berkeley Lab.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Brandt. I'm the Deputy Director for Operations at the laboratory.
Very good, thank you. So just to touch on the agenda for this evening, we are going to hear from Michael in just a few minutes regarding the updates for lab projects and general roundtable conversation there. We have a special presentation on the Joint Genome Institute by David Gilbert, so he'll be coming up. We have a couple presentations teed up here on the screen. And then Jolene Ruffin from the Berkeley Community Fund, a great organization, really helps out young people on their quest to develop their professional and academic careers. Jolene is here to give you a fuller briefing on that organization, along with Janet Tam, a board member of BCF, and we have one of the successful graduates of all of those activities, Eric Jung, also joining the CAG as of this meeting. So welcome to Jolene and to Eric, new members of the CAG, and maybe when they come up to present, they can do some fuller background on yourselves and what your activities have been, and get us up to date on the Berkeley Community Fund. So great, thank you. Great to have all of you here. So just to also remind you, the meeting next time is November 5. So that date shifted in case you burned it into your calendar apps. You want to make sure it is November 5. We are looking to confirm the location. Normally we're at the Berkeley Senior Center, North Berkeley Center on Hearst, but because of renovations that are scheduled there, we may need to relocate. So we're looking into that, so be alert to a notice as to the next meeting. We'll remind you later and through the emails, of course, to make sure that you got that information, and we'll nail down a place as soon as possible. So with that, Michael is going to take us through briefing. We have the remote mic. Sure, that's a nice mic. Take it away.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. What I thought I would do, can we go to the first one, is just update you on the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill. But before I do that, I'd just like to say that going into the fiscal year that we're in, fiscal year 18, this has been one of the most unusual budget years that I've ever seen in my more than 25 years in national laboratory environments. Last year, and as I repeat these numbers, I just want to make sure that I get the numbers correct, is that our laboratory was facing up to a 40% cut at the lab in our overall funding. And what that would have meant for our laboratory is that there would have been no way that we would have been able to avoid significant layoffs. I'm here to tell you that this was the best budget year in our laboratory's history. We're over a $1 billion laboratory now, and so the swing from a potential 40% cut to a plus up of nearly 10% is highly unusual, and this is good news for us and good news for the community, because we're a laboratory that's growing, and in particular, this bodes well going into the next fiscal year. So the energy and water bill for 2019 has been passed through Congress, and it's sitting waiting for the president to sign. And we're assuming that the president, this is a non-controversial bill. We expect that the president will sign the bill, and this will be the first time since 1999, or fiscal year 2000, that the laboratory has not been on a continuing resolution, that we will actually go into the fiscal year with a budget and it's good for the laboratory because we can do better planning and we can execute our mission to meet the national needs that we've committed to. And we expect that FY19 will continue the progress toward a very positive budget for us, so we have a good budget profile. There's a couple of highlights in the bill. Our advanced light source, which is we received more than $60 million to begin nominally a $400 million upgrade to the light source, which will improve the quality of our soft X-rays, which are used by researchers from around the United States and around the world to come in and do research using our beam lines for material science, bioscience, chemistry, and so on. And that's good for us, and it's good for the community. Now that project, $400 million project, is in the planning stages right now, and it's a 7-year project from this point forward to completing that project. And we will have a period where the beam will be offline for approximately 12 months. We call that the dark period because that's when the beam will be upgraded. It's a significant endeavor, very complicated, and we are in the process of hiring additional engineers and scientists to work on that project. Cleanup at the laboratory is important to us because we've committed to brownfield development. So as we vacate buildings, we will demolish those buildings and then prepare the sites for beneficial use. And what that means is that we're cleaning up some legacy contamination at some sites. You've heard about Old Town in the past, and we received another $35 million to complete the cleanup at Old Town. We also received $5 million to begin doing the preparation for yet another new building called the Bioepic building. And what's interesting about this building is it's bringing together our biological and environmental sciences, where we will be working from the cellular level to the ecosystem level and bringing those two very diverse disciplines together in a unique 21st century building that will help create advances in biological and environmental sciences. We're very excited about that. We have begun some initial site characterization. What that means is we've drilled holes and we're sampling to determine whether or not we have any contamination. That will help us determine the next steps in cleaning up and preparing the site for this new building. And then finally, we also received $85 million for our high-performance computing facility, which is referred to as ESNet. That's it's another user facility. It's a user facility, which means the community of scientists around the country and around the world who have been, they fill out applications and they've been granted access. This will help with advanced data analytics, and in particular using the imaging technology, which is essential to our scientific discovery. And you can see, let's see, do we have an example of that? We don't have an example of the imaging technology that we're using, but that's good news for us. Next slide. So we also are very proud of the fact that we have received 2 Secretary of Energy Achievement Awards to recognize the contributions that we're making to solving national and global scientific problems, one for our Joint Bioenergy Institute and one for the Joint Center for Energy Storage Research. And we're proud of these awards because, again, we are the home of team science at this laboratory, and these are team awards that recognize the efforts of our scientists in making important contributions, and in this case, to bioscience. Next slide. the R&D 100 Awards it's been around since 1963, and there's a magazine known as the R&D magazine, and they sponsor these awards. And the laboratory has been the recipient of nearly 100 awards since the early 60s. And this year we have five nominations for various awards ranging from data management systems to devices to recycle carbon dioxide, photovoltaic windows, and some other computing science tools that will help advance our scientific interests. And so we're hoping we do well in the competition, and we're looking forward to receiving additional recognition for those contributions. And what I wanted to do was, next slide please, is to have, we participated in the Solano Stroll. Did anyone participate in that? It was a beautiful day that Sunday. Jen and her team in Winston, they put together a booth for us, and it was during those discussions that I learned a bit more about the interests of the community. And Jen and I were talking that Sunday, and I thought what I'd like to do is that we have some new members to our advisory group, and we have some of you who've been here for some time. And what I'd like to do is hear from you about what has been working well, what would you like us to keep, what other areas, for those of you who've been on our advisory group here, what else would you like to see? And for the new members to the advisory group, what are your expectations? What do you hope to get out of the time that you invest with us? Because the advisory group, for me, this is my third. I've been here at the laboratory for 7 months now, and what I'd like to do is be certain that this is value added for all of us. We're here in the evenings, we're away from our friends and family, and I want this to be meaningful. So I'll just open the floor up to any suggestions, comments, concerns that you might have, because we want to be a community where we're transparent and we're sharing information. And so the first step is to find out more about what you'd like to see. So is anyone willing to start? And I'll hand the microphone over. Do you want me to do that? Yeah. Okay. Okay, good. I can do that.
Hi.
Trip on the cord.
I'm not sure how long I've been a member for, maybe a year now. Sometimes it feels like there's a lot of lecturing at, which can be challenging at the end of the day, a long day. And I don't feel like we're used particularly well as an advisory group, members of the community, members who run organizations. So I think there could be a bit more of an exchange in that way. Also, the lab is such a rich resource that we have in our community. So how can we really engage the lab in the community, and how can we use this group of people to help think that through a little bit, just because we're so lucky to have this resource.
So I appreciate you suggesting that, because, again, this is my third meeting, and after the first two, I was feeling that we didn't really have dialogue. We had one-way communication. We have dialogue in the beginning, but it's more one-on-one, maybe a couple of us talking together. I like that suggestion of having us have a conversation about ways that we can engage the community, engage one another in a way that advances, that either solves problems or advances the interests of all of you for your investment of time. So with that, what would that look like?
It could look like you guys coming to us with something that you're thinking about and getting our input on it, or getting input on ways to involve the community more. It could be, posing a question that enables us to think through. I think I asked Jen after our tour, are you engaging kids? Are kids coming into the lab and the space, and how are you doing it? And maybe posing that is a question for us to solve together. So I think there's just many different ways to structure it, but for us to be engaged in the problem solving together, community and lab.
Other ideas?
Hi, I'm Sarah from
Hi,
City
Sarah.
of Berkeley. I've been on the CAG, I think, about 2 years. Unfortunately, I missed the last 2 meetings, which is unusual for me, but that's why
Okay.
I've not yet met you.
Oh, well, pleased to meet you.
Thank you, same. I would really second what Jody said. I think for me, and I really appreciate that we did an update to the charter not too long ago that I think brings in more of that idea, this opportunity for collaboration and innovation. And sometimes it does feel like the sort of the member share outs at the end get rather rushed, and it could be incorporated more throughout, especially with questions being posed or specific ideas and opportunities for collaboration being brought more into the meeting over its length. And of course, email is also an opportunity to do things outside of the regular meeting structure. And I know Jen does sometimes send ideas, which I appreciate, Jen, thank you. Things like that too, but that's another way in which I feel like it's a nice use of our time. But I think Jody's right that, it's an interesting group of people in the room. It's sort of a unique forum. So that those opportunities for shared vision, shared ideas, ways to collaborate, potential grant opportunities even, good to take advantage of.
Okay. Other ideas? And yes.
I just have one quick point. Hopefully, I'm already heard, but I'll just use the mic in case it's helpful for the taping. So I'm not sure if it's still structured the same, but when Jen and I worked in Richmond on some community engagement around what the lab or UC Berkeley could do, and we were trying to still do some research facilities at the Richmond Fill Station. We had some presentations by Susan Brady Wells, who kind of described what are the things the lab is doing with elementary schools, how do we support teachers, et cetera, and they all seem very good. And one of the things that we got feedback in Richmond, and I know in Berkeley this would probably be a feedback too. I also represent the chancellor in the 2020 Vision partnership between the school district, the Berkeley City College, and a few other groups that are trying to close the racial education gap in Berkeley schools. STEM is one of those areas. Long story short, I think if we were to get a presentation, these are the things we actually do programmatically. And I thought at that time it was schools could schedule visits, and there was also some opportunity for teachers to learn from lab researchers or whatever. And the one idea that came up in Richmond and in Berkeley would be having more of an intentional longer-term partnership with 1 or 2 elementary schools where maybe that gap, the kids that are going to those schools maybe are the ones, or we could say those kids that are more than likely going to face a gap around high school, around STEM, targeting whatever it is that we do, still have the wide open thing, anybody could schedule it, but if the lab was open to the idea of, okay, we're gonna make a special commitment to this elementary school or that middle school in Richmond, one in Berkeley, one in Oakland, there you go, you have a longer term impact on that would also bring about more equitable outcomes with just the access to the great resource of the lab. You wouldn't have to do anything different. You just do it in 2 or 3 places rather than 6 places. So that's just an idea.
Yes, absolutely. Don.
So those who don't know me, my name is Don Medley. I'm the head of government and community relations. Hello. I don't know if Jen's had an opportunity to tell all of you or any of you, but one thing that's happening at the laboratory directly related to what you said is our K through 12 STEM activities is moving up under the office that Jen and I are in. So it's going to be part of community relations. The position, the K through 12 manager, will report to me, but will be directly linked to Jen and her community activities. And I think we would love to bring the K through 12 manager here and with Michael and others have some ideas to run by you guys, to help us think through what makes the most sense. We're doing a search committee. We have a search committee form right now. We hope we're moving very quickly. Jen's the chair of the committee, so she's cracking her whip. And we hope to have somebody in that position pretty soon. So I don't know if maybe in time for the November meeting. Maybe.
Awesome. The last thing I'd say is for us, because we have the Chancellor's Community Partnership Fund, it puts out about $280,000 a year, small catalytic grants. You have to have a university partner and a community partner. And anything where, after you bring on the person who's going to lead that work, if there's a school in Berkeley that wants to be your partner, then you'd be eligible to come to our fund for a little bit of change to help with structure that. So that's the one thing I wanted to bring to being an advisory group, is to help facilitate that if that's something that the lab chooses to do once you bring on your director.
It sounds like a target would be more beneficial for specific schools in Oakland for closing the gap, because the way that the Oakland School District is segmented, it's more appropriate. Berkeley's a lot more diversified, a lot more integrated. It would be hard to target just an individual school, I think, just from my background and experience with the schools K through 5. But Oakland might be a better recipient and more leverage for what you're talking about.
I think it'd be great. Our fund only funds in Berkeley, but it would be a great idea even if the lab was just doing it,
So,
No, I agree. One thing I wanted to comment on, I've been here long enough, that there are sometimes lectures going on, one-sided. From my perspective as a community member, there's a level of awe and excitement, and there's also this droll, like, Stan's not here. I love Stan, but okay, how many times are we going to see these buildings? What's going on? That's fine, because we started with a process here that the lab was looking to reach out to the community, find out what their impact is in terms of moving people either to Richmond or down to a lower Berkeley side or back up on the hill. And a lot of other issues came up. And one of the main ones that has seemed to have died down as far as in this community outreach is that there's not this level of paranoia that the lab has a negative image. It's starting to get erased because of the focus that the lab has put on in terms of reaching out to the community. And this is something that I was hammering, that you pull out a multiple prong approach to try and integrate yourself into the community. And I think it's really starting to show. I mean, there's a little bit more buzz, a little bit more knowledge coming at the grassroots level in Berkeley of what the lab is. And you can see that when you put together, you have your 3 professors or different areas of research come up and they explain that, and it was, I haven't been to any of the ones in Richmond, but I went to the ones in Berkeley, and there's just such an excitement that happens around that. It can continue to build momentum. Getting involved in the schools K through 12 is a huge part of that as well. I guess what I'm getting around to is I've seen this kind of transition from what are you doing, what are you doing, what are you doing, to in a kind of a paranoid sense of we don't trust the lab. When you're doing cleanup, what do you really do? And we've gone through all of that from a learning curve, and we've been lectured, and everybody that's here hasn't seen all of that. It's transitioned to, it seems like everybody here has something that they want to integrate within the community that you're trying to reach out to. So I think that we've progressed to a next level, and I do agree, maybe a little bit less of the full forward information and more looking at creating groups within the structure that can go back out to the community and have our clusters kind of built around that. That's something that we had talked about before, I think before you got here, right. And something that's engaging with some of the people that actually aren't here today, but they normally are.
So, as I said, this is my 3rd meeting.
Right.
The first meeting, Mike, the lab director, was here, and then the second meeting was my first full meeting, and I'm learning as we all are, and in New Mexico, so I'm previously worked at Los Alamos, and I spent a lot of time in the community with elected leaders, with Native American Pueblos, with community leaders, discussing what we did at the laboratory. I was responsible for public health and safety protection, environmental protection, cultural resources protection, and a number of other things. And And we also created relationships with the local colleges to ensure that we could train first-time students, students who were the first in their families to attend college, and create internships. And I don't want to set unreasonable expectations, but if we don't begin discussing community needs and where we can help one another, because each of you are leaders in your own areas, I'd like to learn more about what you're doing and then how we can work together to create some synergy and have meaningful discussion about how not only how we describe what we do at the laboratory, but how we can work together to improve the community at large. And as a resident of Berkeley, when I was moving here, I deliberately decided to live here in Berkeley because I work here and I want to be a member of the community, and I am. And I do hear things when people ask me where I work. I describe the lab, and quite often what I hear is, "Oh, is that the RAD lab?" And I said, well, at one point in its history, it was the RAD lab. And I described the National Laboratory and what the National Laboratory System is and what our priorities are and how in my view, we perform science that serves the greater needs of society. Within the community, it should be within the community, within the state, nationally, and internationally. We work all over the world, and we have 10,000 users who use laboratory resources, and they represent cross-section of the United States and worldwide. And what I'm hearing is we need to connect a bit better here locally. So for the newcomers, what are your expectations?
Can I add just one more thing?
Yes.
The one thing that I don't see here at the table, and we have UC Berkeley, and I love seeing Lawrence Hall Science all the time here, is the JUCO community, the junior college community. I think that it would be important to reach out to them, to pull them in, because that is, you're getting people that are wanting to take a next step, not knowing what is out there, and you are an important part of being able to show them that. From a PhD to just even being part of this support for the labs can be an exciting place to work, and you can be introduced to multiple levels of academic research that you would never find, and it might be interesting.
Right.
And there's a whole level of community that is looking for what are the seeds that exist and who's sowing them, and you guys are a great part of that.
I think this illustrates a need just to I know we've talked about not being talked to, but one thing that's happened at the laboratory is because there's so many divisions and the areas often operate in a silo sometimes, which isn't always great, but there are a lot of interaction with community colleges and community college programs, whether it be in our Earth and Environmental Sciences area or Energy Technologies area, et cetera. So one thing that may be helpful to the group, and Jen and I can work on this for Michael and you all, is just get what are we doing? And we can share that through email and provide sort of a list of what all the activities are in terms of reaching out to the community in the education area, K through 12. We do a lot with Rising Sun. We do a lot with a lot of organizations, but I don't think y'all probably have that information. So that, in addition to the fact that we'll be bringing to the CAG sort of to get your help on what should we be doing more, but to start the conversation, what are we doing now, I think would be helpful. So.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we have an idea of a lot of this. We've been educated on a lot of the facilities, a lot of the new facilities, and what's going on there. But one of the things that we also were stressing was what are the active relationships, and now we need an education on that interaction. And I appreciate that is going to move forward.
And that'll help us as a group be able to connect, because again, each of you represent your leaders in your areas, and this could create a foundation. With all the work that we're doing, that's the foundation that perhaps we can work better together. So for the new people, what are your expectations?
Thank you. I think what's been helpful for me, and just in the short time, this is just my second meeting, is to understand what the LBNL community is and putting a face to it. I think, going to the Salon on Stroll is great. And I'm sorry I missed it, but just meeting you and meeting the real people. And, when we walked through, honestly, the tour seemed like I couldn't tell who was there. It seemed very sparse, and it seemed like people were scurrying around and hidden away. And so somehow creating a sense of who you are as a culture, or as, and I know intellectually, and I know what you're doing, what are all amazing things, but who are you as a group, or as as a community of people, or how can we sort of feel connected to that entity, so that it's not just LBNL up on the hill in their own sort of entity. I think you're already doing a lot of that stuff, but I don't know, for me. And I also represent, I think, different from many people in the private sector, and sort of maybe the design professionals, which is a whole nother component in our relationship to, I can see more direct relations to sort of the environmental aspects of research that you do, and also the Flex Lab has some real practical applications. So that's of interest to me, and also just your own physical structures, which you are your own city, again, like a community up on the hill. So I don't know if that's...
So it's important to hear, because we have one laboratory culture, but within the laboratory's culture, there are subcultures around the science and around the work that people do. But what I would say is that as a culture, we consider ourselves to be valued and trusted partners, because each of us has a role in scientific excellence. Doesn't matter what your job is, whether you're a theoretical physicist or you drive the bus to bring people to the laboratory. Each of us has an important role to make a contribution. And so that's part of the community, because we are a city. We have transportation, we have housing, we have food service, we have energy, we have all the utilities, all the services that a city would have in order to support the important work that we do on behalf of the nation.
Right, and I think what has been interesting to me is to understand what your public mission is. It's, it really is not just research for research's sake. It's really to further social causes, and it's totally accessible to a lot of people who, who maybe can't afford it, or also people who, I don't know, otherwise wouldn't have those resources. So it's really great.
Other comments? Yes. Did you want to?
Sure, I'll say something. Eric Jung. I mean, I was born in the city, did K through college in Berkeley, and having been part of the community for so long, I felt like LBNL has always been really absent along the way. And now being with the city of Berkeley, that's only started to I've seen it slowly come online. But I'm kind of piggybacking off of what a lot of people said, but definitely there's so many resources here, not just the infrastructure, but all of the social capital and human capital that's here. And there are still so many equity problems within the city. Again, having done public education in Berkeley my entire life, and it was, the lab was never really part of that. I am really curious to learn more about what is the integration with the lab and the education system, but also at Berkeley. As a student at UC Berkeley, first in my family to go to college, low-income students, I'm just one of many there. And even something like landing an internship at the lab is a huge opportunity that not only is a resume booster, but that's something that opens up your network. And for many students of my demographic, that's like a make or break of whether you stay in the STEM field or not. And it's really interesting to learn that the lab is doing so much more than just STEM. Like Jen's doing community work, and these are other opportunities that are available for students. So strengthening those ties, and also, since there's so many other organizations out here, continue to leverage on each other and the type of resources that we can provide each other, because this is probably the only place in the city where all these different groups really come together. I think that's really unique and something to take advantage of.
Thank you.
So just building on a little bit of what Eric was saying and others in the room, it was really great on the tour to learn about all of the
great services and all of the connections that the lab has throughout the world and throughout the country. But yes, learning more about what the local connections are, and particularly for our group, as we represent, I represent underrepresented students who are returning to Berkeley after getting their college degrees and looking for opportunities, and how can we connect them to this world-class resource right here in Berkeley.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Anyone else? Final thoughts? Okay.
So I'm not a new person. I've been on the CAG for a couple years now, and I'm the director here at the Lawrence Hall of Science. And I have a couple of things on my mind. One is that I really hope that as people have talked about the opportunities to work together on some of these issues, concerns, that we also think about the infrastructures that are already in place in everyone's organization, so that people aren't duplicating in some ways each other's efforts, but that we're all working together to extend and enhance what any one of us could do alone. We work on a lot of the educational issues that came up, and obviously we're part of UC Berkeley and separate from the lab, but we're trying to do a lot more work together to think about how those ties could be strengthened and how our impact in the community in terms of education could be stronger by working together. So that was one thing. The other thing is, one of the things I'm thinking about is that it's would be nice to have actually some like project we were working on together, or some outcome we wanted to meet collectively, rather than just sharing information about what we do. So I've seen groups like this come together in subcommittees or task forces or something like that to actually accomplish a goal. And so I'm kind of thinking about what that might look like, but it would be a concrete way to try and achieve something collective that wasn't just kind of like sharing what we each do. And the third thing that struck me is, like, one of the things that's really powerful for me, having learned so much about the lab over the last 2 years, is the amount of hope I actually walk out of the room with each time for what's possible in the future. And I know that the youth in this community and in the surrounding communities, and especially in the underrepresented communities that we work with and low income, are just looking for hope for their future. And I was wondering if something we could work on together was how to support people to understand that STEM opportunities are part of the equation for hope, that there's new discoveries every day, that the people really care about their future, and they're working really hard with $1 billion a year to do that. Like, that message would be super helpful, and that's not in all our education that we do. We rely on scientists like you all and the organizations like you to help with providing that the vision of what the future could look like if they only engage. And so that would be one opportunity, I think, for us to think concretely about a project, is one way to think about how we might help do that in our schools and communities.
Okay, thank you. Any final thoughts? So we've captured these ideas on the flip charts, and we'll go back and we'll discuss it internally, and then what we'll do at the next meeting is we'll report out what we've summarized, and perhaps have some suggestions to discuss with the group at that time. Does that feel right to everyone? Yep.
This also, there would be a presentation of what you already do.
Yes. Okay.
That would be a really good starting point.
And I just wanted to add one more thing to this conversation, is that the lab sits in a really unique ecosystem where this is like the innovation hub of the world, we could say, and we have this huge gap and a huge displacement problem, and I think Janet Ficagli gave that beautiful presentation where you connected those dots really well. And so in this ecosystem, how can there be a bridge between students that need opportunity, need extra support into these pathways, and how can the lab also bridge between the private sector? And maybe that's part of the project, Rena, that you talked about, but I think we have all the pieces here to connect these dots.
So, Jody, my reaction to that is you're right. We represent a cross-section of the community. Each of you are leaders, and perhaps together we can find opportunities across our various professional communities to help students find future opportunities where they can grow and develop and actually create a life that they can't even foresee until they have exposure to new people and ideas that they wouldn't have otherwise.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Cogley. I'm with Bayer, and I am late because I was at the East Bay EDA Workforce Development Committee meeting. And at that meeting, the Chancellor of Contra Costa Community College was describing a special tool that they have available for employers to put in the information about what kinds of needs you have and connecting those internship opportunities with their students. And I believe that tool may also be available for Alameda County, so the Peralta system as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. All right, so what I'd like us to do is move on to our lecture series. So any final thoughts? Okay, so with that, I'll turn it back over.
Very good. Thank you, Michael. We will get a summary report out to everyone real quickly after the meeting tonight. Thank you for that conversation. Let's go on to the next item on the agenda, which is David Gilbert to talk about the Joint Genome Institute. We're going to tee up a new presentation here, and if you would like to continue with that microphone, go right ahead.
Good evening, and thanks, Jen, for the invitation. Rena, thanks for hosting tonight. And thanks to Jody for your observation about having a conversation. And I'm here to answer your questions and not to bludgeon you with PowerPoint. But with that, I'm gonna start bludgeoning you with PowerPoint, just a little bit. So you saw this building today, and we appreciate bricks don't make a home. And even the instruments inside that building, as these are my colleagues who currently work with me in Walnut Creek and have for the last 20 years, the instruments themselves don't define our capabilities and our relationship with our community. It is really how we're perceived by our neighbors that makes a difference. And it has for me in my tenure with the University of California and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Because we are part of this equation of bringing science solutions to the world, and I hope to share with you a couple examples today. And would really enjoy you interrupting me along the way if I'm not making sense or you've got any questions. I'd prefer to have that conversation. You thought I was going to talk about science? Well, any artists in the room? Art appreciators? Okay, then you probably recognize this piece. It's about this size. It hangs in the Art Institute of Chicago. And you're probably wondering, why the heck am I talking about this work of art? And I think about this work of art when I think about what we do at the Joint Genome Institute. If you've ever had an opportunity to get really close to this canvas, and this, of course, is Seurat's fine work, what does it look like, for instance, if you go to that intersection of where the dog's tail and the woman's dress in the grass is? You really get a sense of the puntalism involved in this. And closer still, you see the order behind what distinguished his art. And closer even still is you'd see a bunch of microbes. And closer even still, you would see DNA. And that's what the organization that I represent does, is characterize the environment around us. by using the tools of DNA sequencing and other so-called omics technologies. So we, of course, have a mission, as the laboratory has a mission, and it complements the mission of our funding source, the Department of Energy's Office of Science. And while it has to do with our history, there's more to it than that. It's been a long time since I've been in a classroom, and I appreciate the opportunity to be one. So I'm going to talk about genomes, and genomes are the totality of genetic information embedded in the cell, whether it's a human, it's a microbe, fungus. Unlike the English language, 26 letters, the language of life only has 4 letters. And the order of those letters implies functionality. So that's kind of the dominant paradigm or the dogma of molecular biology. That is, DNA encodes RNA, which in turn creates proteins. And proteins are, well, I'm just one big bag of protein and a bunch of other things as well. But it's also where discoveries are made. And we think of it as software because as biology has progressed in the 21st century, it's become more computational. And you'll see how some of the relationships we have with the infrastructure of the laboratory is helping advance the frontiers of biology. You guys just ate. This is what's happening. Right now, just that glucose cycle is what's happening. You look closer, and that's informed by those 4 letters. It's complex stuff. It's even remarkably more complex when we're trying to look at whole ecosystems. You've heard of the Human Microbiome Program. We have developed computational tools that help us understand the challenges about how we relate to our microbial environment. But first, a bit of history. The question I get more than anything is why the heck is the US Department of Energy involved in sequencing genomes? And why was it involved in sequencing the human genome? And it dates back to the role of the national laboratories involved in being stewards of the nuclear arsenal and the nuclear workforce. And that speaks to the original joint, the partnership that brought us together 20 years ago. So we sequenced 3 of the 23 human chromosomes, approaching about 14% of the entire Human Genome Project, out in a little place in Walnut Creek. Chromosome 16 from Los Alamos and 19 from Lawrence Livermore speak to that notion of how does the body respond to radiation insult. In other words, can it respond? What are the DNA repair mechanisms? Chromosome 5, which that project was born right here closer to home, has to do with the lab's commitment early on in the 50s and 60s to refining the ultracentrifuge, spinning blood plasma out, and the observation that it ends up generating 2 bands that we know today as HDL and LDL, the good and bad cholesterol. Chromosome 5 has cardiovascular disease susceptibility genes. So it was Berkeley Lab's interest 20 plus years ago to glom onto chromosome 5 to inform how our diet can help us respond or respond to dietary cues that may influence cardiovascular disease susceptibility. We were the first organization worldwide to publish our commitment to the Human Genome Project in 2003, and then step back and say, now what? National Institutes of Health, concerned with human biomedical applications of genomes, maintain 5 DNA sequencing facilities around the country. No one else was looking at the environmental and energy implications of sequencing DNA and what impact our environment has on us and vice versa. So we started out sequencing model systems like fugu, the puffer fish, and you think, why? Because it's tasty sushi? No, because developmentally, it shares a lot more with humans than most of us would probably be willing to admit. and also the sea squirt, which is a primitive, what they call chordate, meaning it has a nerve column. And for us to understand how we develop and how we respond to our environment, those were some of the early projects we worked on. Then we moved on to the environment, literally, in sequencing the first tree genome, the poplar, which back in the 70s, the predecessors of the Department of Energy was interested in for renewable energy source. Trees grow quickly, can be ground up into the sugars that can be fermented into fuel during the Carter administration. 13 years ago, we sequenced the first tree genome. We have since sequenced 1,500 tree genomes. Diatoms, understanding the White Cliffs of Dover and the environmental implications of a warming environment. The symbiotic relationships between fungi and how we grow our crops, how we protect against crop disease, how we can wean ourselves from chemical fertilizers, for instance. And then we've broadened our portfolio of technology, not to just understand, to read DNA, but to figure out who are the players involved in that environment, what they're producing, and why, and under what circumstances, particularly soil. And as Mike mentioned early on, is going from the cellular level all the way to an ecosystem level, and this is the East River up in the Rocky Mountains, which were involved in characterizing the microbial life that really has to do with the integrity of the water supply downstream. So this is us right now in Walnut Creek, about 17 miles from here. This is where we've been since 1997. There's about 280 of us. We have $70 million, thanks to you, the taxpayers, that we have opened our doors to the greater scientific community from all over the world, come to us with large interdisciplinary challenges that can't be done elsewhere, and they're vetted scientifically and ranked, and then we do it for free, providing we can make all that information publicly available. We rely heavily on the infrastructure of the laboratory. We are Berkeley Lab, and I appreciate you welcoming us to your community. I've been a Berkeley Lab citizen for 25 years. It'll be great to be back on the Hill. And around the infrastructure we work with and the other user facilities, the other national user facilities, the Advanced Light Source, Molecular Foundry, the National Energy Research Scientific Computing Center in NERSC, and ESNet, which is the big pipe that conveys all our data from here to Europe and back. So this is our user community. 1,600 people have come to us with these challenging problems. They range locally from the salt flats of south part of San Francisco Bay to the integrity of our levee and dike system in the Sacramento Delta, and the interface between plants and microbes there, and how restored wetlands are capturing carbon or releasing methane. And this is a challenge for us. Looking at Arctic permafrost, microbes that have never seen the light of day in the eons, and now, as temperatures warm, we're trying to predict what is going to happen when these organisms come to the surface. We look at extreme environments, like in Yellowstone National Park. You can tell it's Yellowstone because there's a buffalo up here. I don't know if you can see that. A source of diversity. And what we try to do is fill in the gaps in the tree of life to inform where the opportunities for discovery may be. Be they in Africa, in sequencing cassava. Cassava is a biomass feedstock for biofuels, but it also feeds 1 billion people on this planet. While Department of Energy is not so focused on the agricultural aspects of food, nevertheless, the techniques we've developed in the information we generate is agnostic to application. So we have helped. My colleagues have gone over to Nigeria and Kenya and worked with communities on how we can combat some of the diseases that are really threatening their food security. We also allocate about 30% of our capacity to the bioenergy research centers, of which you're probably familiar with the Joint Bioenergy Institute in Emeryville, JBay. So we generate information that they can later take downstream and productionize in terms of industrial enzymes and bioproducts and biofuel.
May I ask a question?
Please.
So those projects that come to you, are those unsolicited, or do you issue RFPs and sort of direct what types of things you're interested in learning more about?
So we are proactive about promoting our resource. If we don't have users, we cease to exist. So we go out to scientific communities and conferences, and through calls for proposals, RFP process, we let the world know about these things and the relevance they have to have for DOE's mission, for instance. So, for instance, we just rolled out a new investigator, somebody who never worked with us before, and we had a month to roll out the call for proposals and got over 100 projects in just that amount of time submitted to us, of which we'll probably select about 35, which is a pretty good support rate, especially if you look at other national institutes like NIH. This is the most complicated slide I'm going to show all night, and it just tries to capture the amount of productivity. So 2005, this is, human genomes are 3 billion letters. I checked this morning, inside each one of my 100 trillion cells, 3 billion letters of genetic code. In 2005, JGI generated the equivalent of 30 human genomes in 12 months. It was monumental accomplishment given the fact that the original human genome took 12 years and $1 billion to generate. So it sounds really impressive, but you can see the ramp up in terms of technology and also access to computational infrastructure. So this year we'll have generated, that is 200,000 billion or 2 trillion letters of the genetic alphabet, which is the equivalent of a city the size of Walnut Creek in human equivalents in plants, microbes, and fungi and algae. We don't do anything biomedical anymore. We don't work on humans. We work on the environmental space. So another way to picture the amount of information we generate each week is, this is what Wikipedia generates each week. It's pretty impressive. That's a lot of stuff. It's great resources. We generate 100 times what Wikipedia takes in every week. So we are dependent on supercomputing, on people developing software, on that infrastructure that conveys our information throughout the world. Because we start with this gamish and we try to make order of it across the page and find those genes, putting Humpty Dumpty back together again so that we can help advance some of these challenges we're working on. And of course, these get converted to zeros and ones and go out via NERSC to our collaborators. And not just those 1,600 people. We maintain the web portals and computational tools that anybody, by submitting an email address, can gain access to, whether they're working on human-related stuff or working on energy-related. And in fact, amongst these guys right here, it's Kirsten Fagnan who runs the entire computational infrastructure at JGI. She came from NERSC to JGI, and she's our chief informatics officer. There's ESNet conveying their information. So I just want to touch on a couple of examples of the projects we work on. So some of which are household names, especially around here. We sequence many species of the eucalyptus tree. Eucalyptus, obviously, we know have volatile oils, but also the terpenes can be used for jet fuel, for instance. It's better than using it for fuel that burn the hills up, I suspect. Cotton we sequence, soybean we sequence, sorghum, switchgrass, cassava I mentioned, versions of pine, and also these model species that have very small, compact genomes that can serve as the Rosetta Stone for larger, more complex organisms. Algae can be beneficial. Algae can clog up our waterways and create toxic red tides. We've sequenced more algal species than anyone else in the world, mainly for their interest in lipid or oil production as possible sources of fuel. We've sequenced more fungal species, about 1,500, than any other organization in the world, for those symbiosis, to make plants grow better, to protect plants, to break down biomass into fuel, and occasionally for things that people eat. So we go to a number of extreme environments, really, to learn how we can take a recalcitrant matrix of cellulose, better known as wood, and how to break it down. So when we think about breaking down wood, we think, if you've ever tried to do work on a house, think about termites. Termites are very destructive, obviously, but mechanically, that's not doing all the damage. It's that consortium of microbes inside its stomach that is actually breaking down the biomass. And to extract 5 microliters from a termite gut is no easy feat. It's a lot easier to look at the cow rumen, where there's 100 liters. Grass is not a very nutritious thing, and yet cows produce any number of things. It's the consortium within the cow rumen that creates those essential amino acids that can break down the grass into something it can use for energy, and if you eat meat and dairy, that others can eat as well. And I mentioned extreme enzymes, and our forests would not look the same if there weren't for fungi breaking down biomass. So, any Star Trek fans? Obviously, there's always Star Trek fans around, but I really am committed to thinking, especially when we talk about what is the next generation going to do, and the next generation, what are their jobs going to be like? Have we solved all those questions? And my contention is Earth really is the final frontier. And if you want to get out there into the International Space Station, like one of our colleagues did with a DNA sequencer that can be plugged into your USB port, you can go anywhere. But it's not just the machines that we bring to the occasion. So there's 100 million stars in our own little Milky Way galaxy. If we are wondering whether there are questions still to be solved out there, we can just go to our backyards or our front yards. There are more than 100 million microbial cells in a handful of soil, and probably 99% of which we have no idea what they do. So we use the technologies, in other words, like microbiome research, metagenomics, which is putting all these genomes back together in millions of puzzle pieces in order to understand the dynamics of that environment. We borrow a term from the physics community. We call it microbial dark matter. I'm sure physicists hate that. But what we're looking at are the protective, the susceptible qualities of what's going on in our soil, and how we can wean our dependence on chemical pesticides, for instance, by looking at native versus cultivated soils. But the real challenge is the vast majority of life on the planet cannot be grown in the laboratory. We have to go out into the field on its own terms, grind up what we see, and reassemble all the multitude of genomes into something we can interpret and share. That's what we call metagenomics. So the vast majority is unculturable. And I'm going to end with an example. This is Jillian Banfield. She was among our first users, and she is seen here. This is about 14 years ago. She is in the old Richmond mine, which was producing iron and looking for gold since the 1860s. It's in the watershed of the upper reaches of the Sacramento River near Redding. It is a $1 billion EPA Superfund site. It, for those years, has been contributing sulfuric acid into the Sacramento River, which we drink. So Jill, who's a geomicrobiologist, and her crew went down there, and this is in the infancy of industrial strength DNA sequencing time, and this is what the Army Corps of Engineers have tried to do in order to keep those that acid from hitting the water supply. The urban mythology was that one of her lab members left a shovel in the stream and it dissolved, as you can see, overnight. For those who appreciate the scale of acidity, it is sub 1 pH. If our drinking water is what, 7? It's something like that, very acidic. But things grow in extreme environments. That pink biofilm is what we scraped off, or what Jill scraped off and sent to us to be sequenced. And what we see below are the 3 organisms that manage to live under those conditions. They eat the iron ore, and their waste product is sulfuric acid. So instead of damming up, you could actually contemplate a microbial solution to this challenge of how to keep the bugs from consuming all that iron that still exists in the lab, in the mine. I mentioned Jill because Jill has worked with us now for 15 years. She has many of her graduate students became postdocs at JGI who've gone on to scientific positions at JGI, but she distinguishes herself by filling in more gaps in the tree of life than any other human on Earth. In one paper alone, her group analyzed a backlog of data generated by JGI. And where does the majority of life around us that we think of on an everyday basis reside? Well, there's Saccharomyces cerevisiae, brewer's yeast, important if you like fermented beverages and bread and things like that. There's most of the staples on the planet right there, corn, soybeans, and wheat, all in that little part of the tree of life. There's that cow I mentioned. There's Jill herself. They're all part of the eukarya that's way down here. All the rest of that tree we've barely scratched the surface in terms of discovery. In this one paper, she added 31,000 micro branches to the tree of life on the basis of mining JGI's data and using JGI's tools. We talk about bacterial and archaeal cells, how dominant they are. We haven't talked about viruses, and I'm going to just mention the fact that viruses outnumber all those other things by a factor of 10, and they're really busy out there. We think of viruses as disease-causing. Vast majority of them are part of this delicate dance that goes on in the environment. We, again, don't understand really what they're doing, but DNA sequencing is helping us. That's how many viral infections go on every second of every day. Bacteria have developed an immune system on the basis of this constant onslaught by this. And why am I talking about this? Why should we care about this? Because we build communities and networks of researchers out there. And Jill is emblematic of people who we've worked with over the years. And it's a small community. You may have heard recently of a phenomenon called CRISPR-Cas system that Jennifer Doudna, also a professor on campus and also with a joint appointment in the Earth and Environmental Sciences area in Berkeley lab, happened to have coffee with Jill Banfield one day after Jill released, along with JGI, the initial analysis of that Iron Mountain data set. And embedded in that genome sequence, and science takes a long time, right? here we are 13 years later after they got together for a cup of coffee, and Jill said, look at this weird idiosyncratic sequence phenomenon here from this massive data set that JGI generated that turned out to be what will surely be a billions of dollar industry in the gene modification, gene editing techniques, both in terms of medical applications, environmental applications. We talked about community earlier. We have been in the Walnut Creek area community for a long time. We've had ongoing relationships with Diablo Valley College, Las Positas College, and for the last 4 years with UC Merced, hosting interns both during the summer and year-round, a couple of which we've hired since. I've had a personal commitment to a program that many of you no doubt are familiar with called Biotech Partners that came about from a development agreement 25 years ago between the city of Berkeley and then Miles Laboratory, which a year later became Bayer. So about 4 years ago, Biotech Partners expanded eastward to Antioch High School, and for those last 4 years, we've hosted 5 of these students, many of whom don't come from families whose parents didn't finish high school, let alone go to college, that we have been very mindful of providing access to student populations that frankly otherwise would not have access. So as we move now in 10 months to your community, we're interested in working with Peralta District, continuing our relationship with Biotech Partners, looking at programs on campus, like the Biology Scholars Program and the NERDS Program, both of which are really in our target audience for diversifying our workforce. And I'd just like to leave it there, and I appreciate you. I hope I wasn't bludgeoning you too much with PowerPoint. Thanks. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So any follow-up questions for David here? I'll just switch mics. Thanks. Comments? Okay, we'll go to Eric and Marcos.
Really interesting. Studied biology, so this is really cool. Doubt it was my professor, actually. I wanted to ask how much work, especially as climate change is becoming more imminent, does JGI do research about climate sensibility in organisms, and also do you kind of contribute to the solutions of like GMOs and modifications of the genome to create solutions, especially for things such as agriculture?
Thanks, Eric. So JGI has a scientific staff, programs around plants, microbes, fungi, and such. It's pretty small. So we have internal science. We enable our users to do the science with the information we generate. So when you look at, and I can give you an example of one of our projects that was started at JGI and continues now on the wetlands research, which is related to how to interpret the effects of a warming climate, and that is looking at the levee system and how restored infrastructure in the delta is responding to after having been cultivated for 120 years and then flooding and what's happening there. And as you can imagine, we wouldn't be doing these things if the answers were obvious. So as we see saltwater intrusion from the fact that we're drawing more fresh water, we're seeing the production of more methane into the atmosphere. And those are the kind of projects that understanding that those intersections between plants and microbes are helping us and those 1,600 plus people out there around the world working on projects and looking at the rainforest soil profile and understanding how over time the communities of resident microbes have shifted due to warming conditions. So I would say Our portfolio is devoted to energy, understanding all those biogeochemical processes that microbes have a role in. And from the energy standpoint, is looking at waste streams, for instance, that could be converted into energy, whether it's forestry waste or agricultural waste, how to more efficiently convert that to a usable product, especially when the competition is tough with petroleum.
Okay. Marcos had a comment, question?
So you guys are moving up on the hill, and
Correct.
you're coming from basically an isolated environment relative to the rest of the lab. So can you give me three things off the top of your mind that say these are the most important things we're gaining from moving here to the hill? So that, like, when the community says we're adding more people on the hill, and I'm a community member, I can come back and say, hey, we're gaining this out of research, and these are the top three things that I can just kind of hand back to the community.
So what I did neglect to mention is that it's not going to be just JGI in this building. There's another DOE Office of Science program. It's modest, it's about 20 people. It's called the DOE Systems Knowledge Base, K-Base. They're part of the biosciences diaspora that's spread from Emeryville, West Berkeley, all the way to Walnut Creek. Over the years, we have been, our research has been separate, even though we do things that are quite dependent on each other. And sometimes that physical proximity, running into people in front of the coffee machine or taking a break outside in the sun, that's where the collaborations can happen. We produce the sequence information that they do metabolic modeling on. They have tools that they make publicly available so that a broader user community can take advantage of the raw material that JGI generates. Also, about 35% of our workforce lives here in Berkeley, lives in Albany, lives in El Cerrito in Oakland, and that there's a certain pride of community. And you want to be able to, right now, a couple dozen of my colleagues commute from here on their bikes, both on BART and just riding their bike out to Walnut Creek every day. And it's going to be enriching for them to be spending more of their time amongst the community, not just the Berkeley community, but the Berkeley Lab community, and to be proximate with organizations like the Advanced Light Source, because the information we generate has implications for the proteins they're trying to determine the crystal structure of, to solve new medical challenges that the ALS can tackle, but we can't because of our mission, which is on energy and environment. Likewise with the Molecular Foundry. To be part of this fellowship, really, of user facilities, it's something that we've missed out on. We had a luncheon today for early career and postdoctoral fellows, being postdoc week, and meeting with a gentleman who heads up the Advanced Technologies Office at DOE. He wanted specifically to meet with our emerging leaders. And they said they wanted to be part. We're isolated out there, admittedly. I think the city of Walnut Creek thought we were going to be a magnet for biotech companies, but our main partnerships are through FedEx, right? Little tubes of DNA coming to us. But we do host a meeting of 600 people a year, which we outgrew Walnut Creek and had to move to San Francisco because, frankly, we don't have a place here in the East Bay that, except for the Marriott in Oakland, that we will in 2020 relocate our meeting to. But it's really part of the community, both scientific community, where we evolved divergently from the lab because we weren't just part of Berkeley Lab, we were part of Livermore and Los Alamos as well. And now, as probably our workforce is 98% Berkeley Lab, we feel kind of a kinship that really hasn't had an opportunity to really take root yet, and I'm looking forward to that.
Okay,
I don't know
thanks.
if that helped.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for David? Okay, well,
Thanks again
once
for the
again, thank you,
opportunity.
David.
Appreciate
Really
that.
appreciate the presentation. We have lined up the members of our community advisory group, all three newest members of the group, in fact, Jolene, Eric, and Janet. So perhaps you guys can do a little more background and get started with your presentation.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting us to share a little bit more about what we do at the Berkeley Community Fund. I think it's quite serendipitous that all three of us joined the community advisory group at the same time, around the same time. We'll start with introductions and then go into a little bit about what we do. We'll each touch on different aspects of the Berkeley Community Fund. So I'm the executive director, and I've been with the Berkeley Community Fund for the last 5 years.
My name is Eric Chung. I'm a High Hope Scholar from the Berkeley Community Fund from 2011 and currently with the City of Berkeley. I'm about to transfer to jobs to San Francisco Airport.
And again, I'm Janet Tam. I'm on the board. I just became the vice president, which is a new role for me. And I've been on the board for about 6 years now.
So by a show of hands, before today, how many of you had heard about the Berkeley Community Fund? Okay, so I see a few people, some folks that have been to our dinner before. So our organization was founded over 25 years ago as a traditional community fund, which means that we went into the community, raised funds, and then we gave that money back to the community in the form of grants. $5,000 small grants, and to many community organizations. About 10 years ago, the board decided that they needed to really focus their support in order to have more impact. And that is when we decided that we would be supporting Berkeley High School students through a program called the High Hopes Scholarship Program. And we support academically talented and resilient Berkeley Public High School graduates. This is a picture of our 2018 scholars at their award ceremony this past June. And we had just 10 students in our first class in 2008, and that number has grown over the years. Currently, we support about 150 students in college, and they are attending colleges all over the country, some here at UC Berkeley, many in local universities, and some on the East Coast. To date, we've awarded over $3.5 million in scholarships, and 90% of our High Hope scholars are actually either have actually graduated or are persisting in college. Thanks. So our mission is to bridge the opportunity divide for Berkeley youth from lower income families, and we do that through the scholarships, through connections, and other supports that we feel are instrumental to success in college and beyond. And the vision that we have for our community is that our scholars will be able to achieve their aspirations and become more economically secure. So there is a common misconception about the need here in Berkeley. We live in an affluent community, a lot of high income households, a lot of highly educated people in this community, home to the #1 public university in the world, home to the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. But while the absolute numbers are small in comparison to cities like Oakland and Richmond, there are a sizable number of economically vulnerable families here in the city of Berkeley. And there are a number of households with no adults with a college education. And they're all making their way through the Berkeley Unified School District. So there's a range of numbers out there, but in general, we know that students that come from low income or are first-generation college students tend to graduate at a lower rate than their peers. Berkeley is really no exception. About 30% of students at Berkeley High School have been recognized as socioeconomically disadvantaged, which means that they are they get free and reduced lunch at their school, or they come from a household where there are no college graduates. So just to give you an idea of the numbers, for students who graduated in 2010 from Berkeley High School, less than a quarter of economically disadvantaged students had completed a degree within 6 years, compared with over 50% of students who had parental or other financial support. And kind of a startling statistic to me was that only 14% of African American students and 33% of Latino students completed a degree in 6 years, compared with 68% of white students. And that's right here in Berkeley. So that is many of the reasons why we support the students that we do. We support students who are in the first generation of their family to attend college. 86% of our students are first generation college students. We support students from lower income families. 42% of the students in our programs come from families earning less than $25,000 a year in the San Francisco Bay Area. I don't know how they do it. And 75% are from families earning less than $50,000 a year. And we support students from groups traditionally underrepresented in college degree attainment. 29% of our students are African American, 38% are Hispanic or Latino, 18% are Asian students, and many of those students are first generation immigrants to this country. So we provide our support through 2 programs, the High Hope Scholarship Program, which has been around for the last 10 years, and through a new program called the Berkeley Promise. The Berkeley Promise is a partnership between the City of Berkeley, the Berkeley Unified School District, and Berkeley City College to provide a pathway for students to get their degrees that starts with community college. And some of the partners, organizations that have supported us actually in the room today, Bayer is one of our supporters, and the UC Berkeley Chancellor's Community Partnership Fund is another organization that has supported the work that we do. We support our students through a number of other things. Students are matched with a college success advisor. Many of them are involved in either group mentoring or are matched with one-on-one with a mentor who helps them navigate the challenges of college. Many of them have access to a peer-to-peer support group on their campus that is organized through our organization. And we also help them with future planning and career support as needed. But what I think we really try to do is help change lives. So I wanted to just share one story about a student who was in our first group of students, 2008. She came to the Berkeley Community Fund. Her name is Zulma, and this is a quote from her application to our program. She said, "I remember dreading adulthood because I believed it meant washing dishes for endless hours." And Zulma, when she came to us, expressed an interest in law. We were able to match her with a scholarship funder who is an attorney. And we actually matched her with a mentor who is a judge. And Zulma actually graduated this past May from the University of San Francisco with her JD. In her family, she's experienced a lot of issues with folks in her family being deported. And so she's very passionate about access to immigrant rights. And so that she's currently an associate with a law firm in Oakland working towards immigrant rights here in the Bay Area. So Zulma is just one of the stories of our students that have been able to say we feel like the Berkeley Community Fund has been very instrumental in helping us be successful. And I'll turn it over to Eric, who is another one of our scholars.
Thank you, Jolene. So what exactly does the High Hope Scholarship look like? It's not the Gates Scholarship, but we grant students $16,000, which is actually a huge amount, especially for students who are low income first and their families to go to college. That's broken down into 4 years. So students get $2,000 in the spring, $2,000 in the fall, and $2,000 in the spring. And it basically means, that money is for the students to do whatever they need to do to not just, pay for tuition and pay for living expenses, but it also means you can buy the necessary supplies. It means that you can actually go have fun and have a normal college student social life that many students feel hindered by financially when they go to college. So it's a huge opportunity for students from the Berkeley community to, get this money and go to school. Another thing that we talked about earlier is that we provide students with a mentor, and that is that one person that a student can go to and turn to and build a really close relationship with and ask those questions, whether it's about, how do I sign up for my classes? I need this type of resource. I don't know where to go on campus. That mentor is that person that we hope the student will go to, and from the Berkeley Community Fund to get those questions answered when they feel like they have no one else to talk to. Something really interesting, Jolene mentioned 10 years ago is when the Community Fund transferred to providing scholarships for students, and within those 10 years, I was the 3rd or 4th class of when that happened. It's transformed so much, and the staff members have grown. We've continuously become more and more supported. And that's a huge part of why, students are almost held accountable. We do semester quarterly updates to the staff, providing them, what is our progress, what are we struggling with, what do we need more help on. And students, we keep on coming back. And, like Zulma is an example, I'm an example. And then I wanted to also highlight Kwan, who's 8 years younger than me, a personal friend of mine. The Community Fund is with us along the entire way. That's a picture of Kwan when she interviewed for the Community Fund scholarships, and that is Kwan just last month at her white coat ceremony at Stanford Medical. So, we're really engaged with the students, and the students are always very engaged with us. But of course, it's a community fund, and we really emphasize the power of community. And we already mentioned that, a lot of students go to the same schools. And that way we get to create peer network systems. And for new students, it's a really great opportunity to have that upperclassman to turn to when they arrive fresh on campus and have familiar faces, someone from the same community. A lot of times, we're so close in age that we were actually friends when we were still at Berkeley High School. The mentors are always a very active part of our program, and we do an annual hike with them as well. And those are great staff. Jolene is also in the middle there, our matriarch. And lastly, the donors and the board of directors. The donors, I personally didn't have a great relationship with my mentor, but I had a very great relationship with my donors, who, of course, were the funders of my $16,000 scholarship. But my donors, the Berkeley High School class of 1951, and also the lawyer, the same donor of Zulma, who you saw earlier, was very engaged in my education. And, with him, I got to talk with him about law, education, what my passions were academically. I told him I was really interested in climate change. He brought me to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences when they were holding a session here about climate change at UC Berkeley. And I got this amazing access of resources. He visited me when I was in New York, studying for my master's at Columbia. Continuously made me feel like I was part of his family, and it's just another great benefit of the scholarship program. And lastly, as alumni are graduating, we are now forming our alumni group. So we had our first meeting just 2 weeks ago, and that'll continue to grow and be run by us alumni.
So just in the 6 years I've been with the Berkeley Community Fund, there's been so much development, and there's been more scholars, there's been more successes. Jolene's been an amazing executive director, and I feel like the BCF is becoming even more visible to many, many people in the community. But I also think what's really amazing and inspiring to me is just the history of the Community Fund. It has an amazing sort of legacy, and our original board had this idea. It's very inspiring. There were a small group of Berkeley residents who were actually very activist and very optimistic, and they had a very strong caring and love for Berkeley. And out of that vision, they created a community of hope and equity. And that sort of, we always come back to that as sort of a touchstone for what's important about the Berkeley Community Fund and what we're doing. There are actually some amazing board members. I just list a few. Maybe you know some of them. There's Dorothy Walker, who's been honored a lot in our community. She's a planner in Berkeley. Narse David, who's quite a star in the food, gourmet food sector. There's Keith Carson, who's a supervisor with Alameda County. Lonnie Hancock, everyone knows. Steve Oliver, a prominent contractor. Ira Heyman with the university. So it's kind of a hard act to follow with all those amazing people. But today our board is comprised of people who are from various professions within our community, but really the common commitment is really to the equitable future of our Berkeley youth. For me personally, I feel, I don't know, just my own background. I came from Richmond. My mother I was first generation on my mother's side. She grew up in Chinatown. I am on my father's side. He was an immigrant from China. He came with a scholarship to go to Stanford, but he didn't have the same kind of support that a lot of our first-gen students have, so he dropped out after a year. But nevertheless, education was really important in my family, and so I feel like I can kind of have an opportunity now to help other young people in my community now. And so our board is a working board. We're really very active, very hands-on. We're also equally inspired by our scholars, and they keep us going. And our role is really to look forward, to look outward towards our whole community, and to engage all of you and everyone in the support of our mission. And so part of that is, as we've talked a ton about, internships and career development. That's part of our sort of job to do that and to look for opportunities for our students. It's also creating the fundraising efforts to support them, not just from individuals, but also from organizations and other businesses. And I just wanted to shout out to many of the people who are here. Again, Jen with Bayer has been incredibly supportive. Daniel with MIG has been a longtime sponsor of many things, and also the LBNL is also sponsoring this year. Thank you very much for that, and we continue to grow in our support. The other thing that's kind of unique about the Berkeley Community Fund is that we are the stewards of the Benjamin Ida Wheeler Award, and it is an award that came out of the work and reputation of Benjamin Wheeler, who was one of the first presidents of the university. He turned a little cow town college into a world-class institution. He was really revered for his connection to the community, and so I guess, what was it called? I wrote it down. They were called the Berkeley Service Club Council in Berkeley at that time in 1929. So we're going to create an award for Berkeley's most useful citizen and named it after Benjamin Wheeler. And so you can see the highlighted yellow after all these years. Those are people who are here connected with the lab. E.O. Lawrence, obviously, and Arthur Rosenfield, and many, many other people in our community that are probably recognizable to you. And this year, we are awarding it to Susan Mascarella, who is the founder of the Berkeley Jazz School, who dedicated her career in life to teaching and offering music education to Berkeley youth, and it's developed into a accredited university for music. And so this is just sort of also a plug for our annual gala, which is coming up in October. I know that the lab has sponsored a table, but I think what's amazing about it is an opportunity where we really literally have our community come together and celebrate, whether you see people you haven't seen in years, you go, oh, are you coming? And it's to celebrate our youth, but also just to celebrate our community together.
So we thought we'd just finish off by just showing you a quick video to give you a sense of our students. So this is a video from a few years ago. These are our 2015 High Hope Scholars. So they're all seniors in college right now and hopefully graduating within the next year.
My name is Melissa Sotero, and I'm a first-generation college student. I'm a proud daughter I will be a graduate of the American University class of 2019.
I will be attending Cal Studies today and pursuing my career as a psychiatric nurse.
I will be an architect graduating from UC Berkeley.
I will be a graduate of UC Santa Cruz. I am a high hope scholar.
My name is Norma Briz.
Marco Gutierrez.
Yolanda Shu.
Pablo Isa Pastor. Sawadi Allah.
Julia Yu.
My name is Alexis Ortega. I am a High Hope Scholar.
My name is Pam Rodriguez.
Sequoia Johnson.
Omar Paguero Martinez.
Abdullah Lee, Omer, Hamas Ali.
My name is Ignacio Franco, and I am a High Hope Scholar.
My name is Cassandra Gonzalez. Wesley Barrett.
Zafiro Zalfri.
Mia Hampton.
My name is Ty Hill.
Ocean Spikes. Veronica Smith.
I'm Carlos Montano. Kevin Lee.
Sandy Alegría.
My name is Zenia Parra.
And I'm a high hope scholar.
So we will end it there, and if you have any questions, we are happy to answer them.
Excellent. Any questions, comments for our group? Tell them about.
So in 2004, I was the sustainable business intern in the Office of Planning for the City of Berkeley, and I needed to get some work done to engage with small businesses. And someone said, talk to Berkeley Community Fund. They are a possible source. And by the time I traced them down, they said, oh, we only do education scholarships. And I was deeply disappointed. And what I want to say now is that the people and the organizations that I see that are successful have a laser focus on the things that they want to achieve. And I commend the Berkeley Community Fund for choosing a direction and following through over a long period of time to make a deep impact in our community. And I forgive you for not giving me money so long ago.
Thank you, Jen.
Well done.
I was just curious because I know about the fund just through Eric, who just refers to it as his scholarship. And I wondered, I couldn't quite tell if there is, other than the alumni network, if there's a formal continued relationship post-college, or if that's, that's Eric as, an example here. I mean, clearly, both the money itself, but then that mentoringship and the relationship with the donors seem incredible and rich. But I was just curious if it's intended to go beyond college as well.
Well, our intention wasn't always to do it to work with students beyond college, but as students started graduating and coming back and reaching out to us and saying, we need support. We need help with job interviewing. We need help with looking at our resume. It's something that we've started to look at. So we have a career support task force that's looking at how do we prepare students to be successful once they graduate, and then once they graduate, connecting them to local businesses, short-term mentors who will help them through that process of job exploration. Not all of our students come back, unfortunately, but those that are here often engage, and there's more and more that are starting to actually get together and form a network that is supportive to each other and finding ways to looking to us for what type of professional development opportunities we can offer them.
I just want to add, I think students like Eric have actually given back so much to the organization. We bring them out and have them speak, and people immediately connect and understand why we're doing what we do, and they're our best ambassadors, really.
Great, thank you. Any other follow-up points? Okay, once again, thank you, and welcome to the CAG. What a great connection, especially going back to the earlier conversation. There's a pretty strong theme here about the way in which the lab could connect and where we might have the basis for a strong community project, which is getting more youth connected to STEM careers. Unbelievable. What a great place to do it, and the resources are here. So let's think about that and maybe come back to it for our next meeting, and maybe we could have some breakout discussion groups or something to generate some energy around that idea, maybe other possibilities. So we do have the last item for the agenda tonight, which is CAG member updates, things that you want to convey to your fellow CAG members here that may be less where we may be unaware of, or just interesting projects that relate to many of the interests that are represented here around the table. Any updates that you wish to make regarding your activities near and far? Okay, Sarah?
Love to take the opportunity to put a couple plugs out there. One is that it is currently open registration for the Bay Area Sun Shares program. This, all of us as residents of kind of the 9-county Bay Area region have opportunity to take advantage of this program to get discounted. Is that from me, Daniel, or? No, okay. Basically, it uses bulk purchasing to provide discounts for solar PV systems. So if you're thinking about putting solar on your roof, or if you are interested in buying an electric vehicle, this is a great opportunity. It vets contractors, and it just has this limited period. It's open enrollment right now, so that's called Bay Area Sun Shares. City of Berkeley is one of the sort of supporters, promoters of this program, and it was striking me that it's something that Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and Bayer and other larger employers also have opportunity, and so something you might want to consider in the upcoming season. This has been an annual event. This is the third year that City of Berkeley has participated. And in terms of sort of sponsoring, it just means getting the word out to your employees and encouraging people to participate. And it's nice and easy to do because it gives them discounts on things that they may want to do anyway. It's also soon to be open enrollment for the Earthquake Brace and Bolt program, and this can allow you to get $3,000 from the state if you would like to do seismic improvements to your home. So that's another thing to look out for as residents of this area. It's going to be open October 9th to November 13th. Let's see, what else? Just wanted to share that the city is about to do a community-wide electric vehicle strategic plan. We're calling it the EV Roadmap. We'll be kicking that off most likely in October and plan for it to be about a 9-month process. So definitely interested in stakeholder involvements, and it's going to be an exciting project. And we also are more formally than in the past incorporating both UC Berkeley as well as the Berkeley Labs efforts and successes in terms of their climate action work into the city staff's annual update to City Council, which is occurring on December 6th this year. So I reached out to John Elliott, who very quickly and enthusiastically said, yes, I can be there and would love to participate. And Kira from UC Berkeley will be as well. So just wanted to share that is something that our council members often ask about. And so we are very excited to get that explicitly included this year. And then just another thing that we're working on in terms of another city council referral called the Deep Green Building Initiative is really looking at ways Berkeley may go beyond the state building code requirements in the upcoming code cycle, which becomes effective January 1st of 2020. So looking to go beyond both in the green measures as well as in energy code measures. And also we've been doing more education and outreach and information about moving buildings, not only vehicles, but moving buildings towards electrification, getting them off of natural gas and using electricity instead for space heating, water heating, and other needs. So obviously these are all a little biased towards my position within our Office of Energy and Sustainable Development, but just was hopeful that's sort of useful info for the folks here, and obviously excited for opportunities to work together too.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Further updates?
Yeah, so we moved to Oakland. We just bought a building. And thank you. It's an awesome old historic building, and we would like to green it and make it a beautiful demonstration site. So any advice, guidance, support we can get from this group would be awesome. We're also, Rising Sun is running in the Berkeley Half Marathon November 18th. So if you want to join our team, you can. We're fundraising for that. You can run the 5K or walk the 5K, 10K, or the half marathon, and it's really fun. And we're having a grand opening in January that I'll invite everybody to.
Okay, Jennifer?
I came a little bit late, and I think we were talking about education and pathways to employment. One of the things I've learned in my role is that by kindergarten, there's already a 20-month gap for our underserved students in the area of math. So the East Bay STEM Network is really focusing on early math games. And so I just want you to tune your hearing for opportunities to engage on this. Bear volunteered at something called Fairyland, F-A-I-R, Eland, which is organized by East Bay EDA and engages very young people, kindergartners, on math games. So just keep your ears out for that and for opportunities to engage with very young people, because as we know, it pays off. People who are very young soon become grown-ups. I have 3 of those and myself, and it's terrifying. And then something that's very near term and actually fun is, and not that math games aren't just the bomb, they're super fun. The Visionary Awards, I'm going to channel Kirsten McDonald today because she can't be here. The Berkeley Chamber puts on an annual event called the Berkeley Visionary Awards. It's often the winners have taken a technology that is mind-blowing from either UC Berkeley or the lab and taken those technologies and put them in action in the marketplace and in the community. It is a tremendously inspiring event because it shows the ways that university, local government, business, and community can all work together to build a visionary community. So I invite you all to join. I know that Kirsten has made free tickets available in the past. I'm now going to commit her to do that now by accident. I hope that was okay, Kirsten. Okay, good. And so see me or Kirsten if you have questions about that. Oh, I'm sorry, October 23rd. And it'll be at the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, also known as BAMF.
Right.
Yes, what she said.
October 23rd, what day of the week is that?
It's Tuesday.
Tuesday.
We can send around the details. Okay, great. Yeah, we'll send something to you.
Okay, any other items of note? Rena?
Hi, how are you all tonight? It's been great to hear everyone's updates. I just wanted to mention a couple of things that we've been involved in. One is that, as I've mentioned before, this is our 50th anniversary year, and we've been redesigning some of our programs, and I'll just highlight 3 that we're very excited to release some new public programs related. One is related to the partnership we've had with Bayer and our biotech lab, and we're on course to, this spring, unveil some new biotech activities for our visitors on drop-in basis, so we're very excited about that. Another is that we're redesigning some of our festivals that go out to schools and communities through outreach. And with the generous support and scientific collaboration of the Berkeley Lab, and as well as some of the other organizations that we work with. And we're also lucky enough that the Berkeley Schools Fund is giving a grant so that every Berkeley public school, elementary public school, will be able to bring either a festival or show to their school this year. So we're excited about that. And then we're also in the process of redesigning our summer camps for this upcoming summer. So stay tuned. And one of the things we've been excited to be able to do over the last couple of years is we've tremendously increased the number of scholarships we give out for those camps so that underrepresented and low income young people can attend, even though they can't afford the cost of a summer camp at Lawrence Hall of Science. And so this last year, we actually gave out close to 70 scholarships for camperships for whatever people needed, full or partial. And we're looking forward to have a redesigned program for this summer, as well as continue to offer those scholarships.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Any other updates? Here we have Jessica.
Thanks. 3 words. Fall plant sale. Ah! It's gonna be awesome. So many plants for sale at the Botanical Garden. And if you get there early and you become a member, you can have a cinnamon roll. That's it.
What are the dates?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask about cinnamon rolls and what flavors and stuff. Okay, September 30th. It's a really big, busy time of year. I know everybody's got a lot of stuff on, but please don't miss it. I'm definitely going to be there. I will definitely be eating all the food and drinking all the stuff, so you have to get there early. And there are so many plants this year, like loads, tons. Room of rares, so many things to look at. You guys, everybody here can buy a plant to take home and let it die on your porch, or you could plant it this year and do something special for the environment, for conservation, saving the planet. We're all about that too. That's it.
Gotta love it.
What? You can compost it, and then you can come back for a spring plant sale and start the cycle all over again. It's going to be awesome. Yeah.
You count on those of us
I am one of those. It's so sad on my little porch right now, I have to tell you. It's terrible, but it's also like a good reason to come to work that day. So just don't tell my coworkers. It's like a murder scene out there. It's so bad. It's really horrible.
Excellent. Okay. I think we're ready to wrap it up. On that note, thank you all for coming. It's been a great evening, very informative, and good exchange. And next meeting, November 5, location to be determined. We will let you know. Have a great evening. Thank you very much.